Welcome to the FarmBeats podcast.
FarmBeats is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBeats podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with expert producers and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agricultural technology.
Hello, FarmBeats followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBeats podcast. I'm Victor de Souza Ferreira.
And I'm Camila Rodrigues, and we are glad to have you with us as we begin our discussion on pesticide application technology with Dr. Rodrigo Worley and Dr. Chris Proctor.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Camila and Victor, appreciate it. So Rodrigo Worley, I'm an extension weed scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A little bit about me. I'm actually from Brazil, born and raised in a small community of Dutch immigrants. Grew up surrounded with agriculture. I decided to study agronomy for my bachelor's degree at São Paulo State University in Brazil. And during school, I had the opportunity to do an internship, actually back in 2009 at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I was there for a 6-month internship. From there, I had the opportunity to return back to Nebraska, to UNL, to do my master's and my PhD. I actually worked at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln West Center Research and Extension Center out in North Platte as a cropping systems specialist for almost 2 years. And then in 2018, I transitioned to the University of Wisconsin, where I started as an assistant professor and now as an associate professor of weed science with extension responsibilities in weed management in corn and soybean production systems.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invitation to be on here today. So my role is changed a little bit over time. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, out in Washington State. I got a master's degree from Washington State University, focused in, it was a crop and soil science department, but it was a turf grass focused project. So I really got my start in turf grass. Came to Nebraska in 2010 for my PhD, focused much more on weed science at that point. And in 2015, took a position as an extension educator with statewide responsibilities focused on weed science. And so a lot of what I've done has been very extension focused, very applied, and how do we take research information, put it in the hands of growers. And so right now, most of what I do is related to the corn and soybean management, thinking about how do we manage weeds within those systems. There's any number of challenges that farmers are facing right now. And so a lot of thinking about what are different tools that we can utilize to assist farmers in that. So certainly herbicides are a part of that conversation, but we think a lot about using cover crops, crop rotations, different management strategies. So how do we keep tools in the toolbox so that we can effectively manage a lot of the challenging weeds we see out there? And so that's a lot of my focus. And then how do we communicate that effectively? So what does it look like to take these ideas and concepts and help farmers implement them? And so more and more I see it as a two-way conversation. So I have certain things that I've learned and try to communicate that to farmers, but I say I learn as much from farmers as I hope maybe they learn from me. And so trying to understand where they're successful, what are their questions, what are they learning in their operation, and how can we work together to find some of those solutions. So that's where I'm at right now.
And if I may here, a point that's important to share, I think, right, Chris? We overlapped in graduate school. We're close colleagues now, and we've become great friends that way. So it's awesome to be sharing here the stage with you.
How can university extension programs contribute for pesticide application best decisions?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of it is there's different pieces of that question. I think trying to understand one, it's understanding what are the problems that growers are facing, and so I think we need to do the work and having the conversations and being out where farmers are doing their work to say, what are the challenges that you see, what are you struggling with, and then a lot of application technology, and it's so heavily supported by industry, really advancing a lot of those areas. And so how do we connect those two together? And I think extension plays an interesting role in that. We like to say that extension can be more of an unbiased resource, and I say that cautiously because I think we all have our biases, but I do think extension plays a unique role in that. We don't have a product that we're selling, and so I think sometimes we can offer conversation and partnership in ways that the industry doesn't. So I think it's complementary, right? I think you can't get any one piece out of the equation. I think it's all necessary for success, but a lot of it's around awareness, around best use of the technology. I think we learn a lot from trial and error.
You brought up some really good points there. I would like to, use this opportunity to share examples of how I think we, assist growers, because it's a very complex process, right? There's several steps involved in, making a pesticide application. I think where it all starts is selecting the right, in our case here, we're talking weed control, the right herbicide, the right adjuvants, right? And in extension, one way that we support our growers is through our evaluation trials. So we show what's working, what's not working. And one way we document that is through our weed guides, right? Nebraska has, the UNL, the group, the weed science group at UNL, they have a very, very strong weed guide. We also have our own pest management guide here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Those are publications that we update on a yearly basis, where we incorporate label information and also research information to help our growers and their decision influencers start that initial point, which is selecting effective herbicides, right? We want to make sure we're spraying the right herbicides at the right time and selecting those chemicals. I think it's an initial step that's very, very important, and we do our best to provide, as Chris indicated, unbiased information. And then we also have other colleagues that work more on the application side of things, where they're looking at different nozzles, carrier rates, and so on. So what we try to do is bring all this information together via publications, via videos or trainings, and so on. So growers and the applicators, they have the right information that they need to make an effective application to control the weeds that we have out there.
One thing I would add, I think one thing that the university has done pretty well over the last number of years is really bringing information and research around resistance management. So being able to manage resistant weeds is critical for farmer success, and I think the university has played a pretty important role in, one, defining the problem, but then also really working towards what are some of the solutions that farmers can implement so that they can continue to have success, manage difficult to control weeds. But yes, a lot of it's around these resource development and understanding.
That's great. Taking that point that you mentioned, Chris, about the weed resistance, what are the challenges and the opportunities related to it?
Yeah, I think it's probably easier to start on the challenges side. You look at the cropping systems that we have in the Midwest. Crops that we see in corn and soybean, they are planted at very similar times, or harvested at very similar times. They often use similar management practices and how they're managed. And so I think just given those systems, we've naturally selected weed species over time. And then you add the chemistry piece. You know, it's been a really important tool in managing our cropping systems. But the way that they've been utilized historically has certainly led to resistance, right? So using low rates, using the same mode of action over and over again, tends to select for resistant populations. And then just there's not been a lot of new technology development in the chemistry space, and so we have a limited number of products that we have to use in these systems, and so so you think of all those things, and so there's a lot of selection pressure being put on our cropping systems, both from a management side, from a chemistry side, and in the end, it results, and then we have some really difficult to control weeds. The pigweed family is notoriously challenging to control. So that, I mean, certainly highlights some of the challenges. But you think of the opportunities. To me, I think it's forced us. Resistance has forced us to think more broadly about how do we manage our systems, and I think that's a good thing, because it doesn't just influence how we manage the weeds themselves, but it, you know, a discussion around soil health. I think as we broaden our thought process around management and managing the whole system, it's going to influence soil health. It's going to influence how we manage nutrients. So I think there's some good things that come from that. So while the challenge is there, I think the opportunity is, can we think more broadly about our tools? Can we think more broadly about our management practices, knowing that they have broader implications? Climate smart technology is a big one. So how do we manage our systems in such a way that is not detrimental, thinking about our climate, but right, is working towards improving those things? And so that would be one way I'd highlight some of the opportunities there. Rodrigo, I'm sure you'd have additional thoughts there as well. You do a lot of work in this area.
Yeah, no, you brought up some excellent points there, Chris. Weed management, thinking about corn and soybeans across the Midwest for about 2 decades, there was quite simple, right? And that's just not the case anymore. It's gotten more complicated, more complex, and it's gotten more expensive for the farmers as well. But because it's gotten more complex, we're looking at alternatives, right? Just like what Chris described. For instance, we do a lot of research looking at how can cover crops help us improve weed management. We wouldn't be doing this type of research if 1 or 2 passes of glyphosate was still working. And because now we're doing more and more of this work, we're talking more about it, we're having a better understanding of how, for instance, cover crops can help with soil health, but can also help with overall weed management programs. And because we're talking more about this, I feel like a lot of growers that probably wouldn't consider adopting a cover crop, they're more exposed to the idea and the potential benefits. And that way, a challenge, which is herbicide resistant weeds, is generating an opportunity here to have more diversified system. So that part is fascinating. And the other thing, which is kind of a topic of discussion here today, is technologies, right? There's a lot of technologies and investments now in areas related to weed control, right? For about 2 decades, glyphosate was working just fine. It was doing a phenomenal job. So there was not a lot of incentives for looking into new molecules or new strategies. And now it's different. Okay, we haven't had a new set of action in the market for about 30 years. There are some potential chemistries that we're exploring now, all in the research phase. They're probably gonna, it's probably gonna take another 5 to 10 years until growers start seeing them. Meanwhile, the Palmer Amaranth in Nebraska, the water hemp here in Wisconsin, they continue to be driver weed species. They're evolving resistance to a lot of the herbicides that we're using. So this is a real challenge that we have out there. So how do we use more integrated strategies to control these weeds? How do we go, now it's time to go back to the whiteboard and start revisiting some of the agronomic decisions that we didn't pay close attention before, but we need to moving forward. We talked about cover crops. The other one, we've done a lot of work, right, Chris, through the Nebraska Soybean Management Field Days and also through our research here in Wisconsin looking at row spacing, right? A lot of our growers are in the 30-inch row spacing. As Chris described, water hemp, Palmer amaranth, they're really adapted to this corn soybean rotation. And the best way to suppress Palmer water hemp is, canopy closure. So this is how cover crops help, and this is how narrow row spacing helps. So planting early, planting narrow, all those modifications we can make to our current cropping systems there to make them more competitive with the weeds. So I think, from a big challenge here, now we have a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, as resistance continue to evolve, we need to think about new ways of managing weeds, right? And when focusing on herbicides, what can we be doing differently and achieving good control? And
As in talking about all those challenges, Rodrigo, how novel technologies can address this situation?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question, Camilla. I think novel technologies is broad, right? It's a big question. So I'll take a first stab here, and then Chris, I will pass it to you. The idea of cover crops, there is nothing novel about cover crops, right? But it's something that has come back. And how do we bring cover crops as part of a weed management, integrated weed management program? So it's not a technology or a novel concept per se, but it's something that we're bringing back into our system. So how do we put these technologies to help manage this system? So that's a big focal point. But the other aspect that I want to talk about is the high tech part of things, right? So there's new ways that we can apply our pesticides. There are novel technologies. There are the smart sprayers that are gaining a lot of popularity, right? There's also a lot of interest in using drones. There's a lot of interest in collecting imagery to try to understand where the weeds are so we can target those areas, so we only deliver the pesticides to those areas. There's a lot of interest in having a better understanding of the soil within a field, right? The variation of soil texture within a field, because once you know that soil texture in that field, you can adjust rates of pre-emergent herbicides, so you can deliver the right rate of the herbicides. Okay, so where I'm going with this here on this more novel technologies, understanding where the problems are, or understanding what the conditions of the fields are, so you're delivering the right rate of the pesticide at the right location. And I think this is where we're headed here within our discipline from a applied management standpoint. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating time to be engaged in thinking about these things. You think of the millions of acres that are managed for agronomic crops, and we're getting down to the point where we're trying to manage square inches of these fields. That's pretty phenomenal. And so they're really data-driven questions. I think what's interesting is how do we there's a bit of a seesaw effect. So one technology advances, then our ability to use that technology catches up, and then the problems are highlighted, and then the technology comes in behind to try to address those problems. And so sometimes it kind of feels like a lot of starting and stopping. You go down a road thinking that maybe that's the right solution, only to realize that you've inherited other challenges as a result. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but I do think this idea that Rodrigo highlighted right there at the end of his comment, that it's the ability to deliver very site-specific mechanisms of control. So the right place, the right time, the right dose. I think technology is really allowing us to begin thinking those ways. Before a lot of the new technologies have come online, we were managing regionally, we were managing at the field scale, single dose, single application on much larger scales. And I think it allows us to manage on much finer scales. The challenge is you generate all this data, you have all this advanced technology, management just becomes harder. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into managing effectively. But it's exciting. I think it's really exciting to see where it can go, and I think the opportunities are.
Oh, that's great. Rodrigo, you mentioned about the smart sprayer. How universities are involved with this novel technology, for example, the smart sprayer?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Victor. And so as far as novel technologies for pesticide application, I think the two main ones that we're discussing a lot these days, and then Chris, if I'm missing anything here, feel free to add. I think drone applications and then the smart sprayers. So really quick here, give some information regarding drone applications or UAV applications here in the state of Wisconsin this past 2 years. There are a lot of new business starting, so we're seeing a lot of young folks out there going out there buying large drones. The one that's become very popular here in Wisconsin is the T40, and they're being used primarily for fungicides applications here in the state of Wisconsin, and primarily in corn. Okay, here in Wisconsin we have a lot smaller fields, especially when you compare to Nebraska. We have a lot of fields that have a large perimeter to area ratio, okay, where it's difficult for the airplanes to deliver the fungicide. So there's a niche opportunity for drone applications, a lot of interest on that, okay? And these drones are also being used to spread cover crop seeds at the end of the season there. So it's pretty neat to see this one tool, right? This one drone being used for fungicide application and later on to spread cover crop seeds. As far as herbicide goes, I think we still have a lot of work to do. Trying to relate a herbicide application with drones. I think drift becomes the main concern, and also the lack of a consistent pattern when spraying a herbicide. I think from a herbicide resistance management standpoint, we know that we got to be delivering a good coverage and delivering the right rate to those weeds. And if we have application with drone and that application is not consistent, that may lead to some problems. So those are some of the concerns that we have right now regarding drone applications. But again, back to your question, how can universities help? This is when we're partnering up with folks that are buying drones to try to do some work to understand, what are the settings here that we can use to optimize performance of these applications. Okay, in the university, we have the main power, we have access to land where such projects can be done. So that's been fascinating. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, we conducted some work looking at deposition aid, right? We're looking at adjuvants that can help increase deposition of spray particles from drone applications. So again, tremendous opportunities here for the universities, for us academics, to partner up with those that are flying the drones, but also those manufacturers out there that are developing products. This is also new, lots of questions, so it's an exciting time. And then back to the extension front, we can go out there and communicate. As the other one's the smart sprayers used in our current systems. We recently held or hosted a webinar, and this webinar is available online via YouTube. So if the listeners are interested in learning more about smart spray technologies, right, Chris, we organized a webinar in the month of September. We had a lot of people that were interested, and folks out there might be wondering, what is this guy talking about, smart sprayers, right? So there's several ways these technologies are being referred to. Some folks call it a spot spray technology. We refer to it as a smart spray technology. Some describe it as camera-based targeted applications. What we're talking about here are these new technologies where they have a camera, and as the sprayer is traveling, that camera is detecting weeds in between the crop rows and only deploying an application where those weeds are detected, right? Is what we call a green on green targeted application. Not to promote one technology versus the other. Chris, myself, and our colleague, Dr. Anita Dilley at Kansas State University, we're working closely with the One Smart Spray group. They're a joint venture between BASF and Bosch, right? But there are other players out there. Another example is John Deere and Blue River Technology with their See and Spray Ultimate. There's also Green Eye Technology out there. So there are different companies that are bringing this concept here to the market, and they're just taking off. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of opportunities, but I think there are a lot of questions, right, Chris, on how to best deploy this technology. And this is where we as Extension, we always have the grower in mind. We always have our agronomists there in mind, and we want to help the industry. As their technologies get deployed, we want to make sure that we're deploying those technologies the right way so they can be successful for the companies out there, but also successful from a grower's standpoint. And I'll let Chris chime in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good overview. Just thinking about the technology, I think there's a lot more questions than there are answers at this point. So it's a fun opportunity to be involved in being just part of the conversation and the learning process. I think it's an interesting opportunity in that it's one of it's not the only example, but it's a good example of collaboration between kind of engineers and people that are really good on the technology side, collaborating with more the agronomy side, and kind of coming together. And it really is highlighted in this type of work, the need to have both expertise part of the conversation. And so I think as it develops, that's where I think the university has unique opportunity to give input, is really thinking about what's the best fit of the technology into the system. I think the university, we just have kind of broad range of expertise. You just think of the agronomy department at UNL and the number of faculty that are working on a lot of different areas. So just having that level of exposure, think about the system as a whole. So now how do we take this technology? And it'd be really easy just to say, let's just take this technology and let's just kind of force it, if I can call it that, force it to fit within the system that we built, versus what does it look like to adopt and adapt our systems around the technology. So what's the best timing for a technology like this? We're used to spraying at certain times of the year that we found to be effective for traditional spray applications. We need to change our mindset around this type of technology. We need to utilize it different. A good example is when the technology was first being developed, a lot of the perceptions were this will be a great opportunity to go into the field, detect weeds that missed early season applications, and then we can spray them late in the season and kind of recover or kind of save any weed escapes that might be there. But as we've had opportunity to work with the technology and the development around it, it becomes clear that that's really probably not the best use case for that technology. It's more well suited for early season applications when the weeds are small. And so I think there's learning curves around where does it fit within the system that I think are really interesting. And really the big opportunity that I think is fascinating is it integrates both agronomic. There's some environmental questions I think that we can get into. So now we're applying maybe lower doses across an entire field, but higher doses where the weeds are, and so more targeted applications. There's economic questions that come into play, and so there's a lot of integrated pieces around these technologies that become really fascinating. How do we utilize them in the best way possible? Because these are huge investments that are made both by companies and then growers and successful. We're going to be able to utilize these technologies in the long term. Understand how they become really important.
And based on research, Rodrigo, what are the benefits of using the smart sprayer? And is it reducing the chemical usage?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So can it reduce chemical usage? The answer to that is, as anything in, I guess, in agronomy, is it depends, right? I think the main point there, you're going to see reduced chemical usage if we have good control of what's in our seed bank, right? If we do a good job controlling weeds, early season, what we're seeing is, there's almost like a direct correlation, right, between weed infestation and the amount of herbicide that's used. So if you start with a good, in our research here, right, Chris, if we do work where we, have a strong foundation, we either have cover crops there helping with early season weed control, or if we have a very good, very strong pre-emergence herbicide program, we have reduced infestations of weeds to be controlled post-emergence. And in those scenarios is where we're going to be seeing the most savings. Okay, so yeah, so if there's good, foundation there, there's going to be good reductions in pesticides that are used from a post-emergence standpoint. So we do see that in our research. I guess, as far as benefits, I think, this idea of targeting only applying a pesticide where the pesticide is needed, I think our growers, they want to see that. And I also think that the general public, they want to see that. So I think as this technologies advance, and if we can do a good job adopting them, I do see that as a win-win. As a side comment, there's several environmental pressure or concerns as well. We want to reduce the environmental load with pesticides, right? So if we can have targeted applications, again, delivering the herbicides where we want them to be, again, that's a win-win for the farmers, for the general public, and also for the environment.
Yeah, I would add to what Rodrigo just said, is that it really depends on the system that it's being implemented in. And so right now there's a global effort to adopt this technology, and so it's being tested and utilized in Brazil. It's being tested and utilized in Australia and Europe. I think for each of those places, broadly speaking, they have very different objectives around the adoption of that technology, and as a result, the answer to that question, I think, is very different in each of those places. But when you think about North America, you think about our cropping systems, you think about the issues around weed resistance. I think reducing pesticide in total is probably a secondary piece to the overall equation. While I think it's important to think about, and in certain situations, I think it's possible. I think the need to improve efficacy or efficiency of our pesticide or herbicide applications is probably the primary one. So we need to control our resistant populations. And so being able to think about, we've said it a couple of times, this idea of a dose per plant instead of a dose per acre. So can we spray weeds at different sizes with different doses and the appropriate dose, or maybe different chemistries as the technology advances and can distinguish between weed species? Can we now target individual weed species with specific doses and specific chemistries to improve our efficacy? I think that's probably more where the industry seems to be going, where the technology seems to be going for North America at the moment. And I think as that improves and as we get better at utilizing it within our system and still maintaining, like Rodrigo said, really best practices around residual chemistries and managing our weeds, I think over time we might see a reduction overall in chemistries applied, but I think we're going to see more efficient applications of those chemistries and more targeted applications of those chemistries, and putting them where they need to be and not putting them where they don't need to be. And so I think it's possible, but I think there's a bigger question around that than just can we reduce total chemicals. And I think that's a good place for us to be in North America, is to ask the question that way, because just to highlight, not to say one's better than the other, but you look at Europe, it's a very different system with very different needs, very, very different cropping systems. But they've gone to a system where they've mandated reduction in chemistries. And so I think if regulation becomes part of the equation, then the conversation changes a little. To approach that.
Yeah, no, just I think Chris brought up some excellent points there. So I think at the end of the day, it's more than just reducing, that chemical usage, but being more strategic, right? All depends where you're at around the globe. Some are after the savings, but as Chris just indicated, resistance is a big problem here in North America. Targeting effective herbicides is where I think this technology is where they're needed. It's where this technology has the potential to truly shine here in our current, corn soybean rotation, especially as you think from a Midwest standpoint. Great point there, Chris.
Chris, are there any regulatory considerations for using smart sprayers?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions around that right now. I don't know that I'm the best equipped to answer all of that, but I might be able to highlight a couple of things that we've just heard discussions around relative to this. And so if you just take, for example, the idea of applying a dose plant as opposed to a dose per acre, all of our labels have been written right now and developed and through working with the EPA is certainly around a dose per acre. And so there's the total amount of chemistry that's allowed to be applied on a per acre basis. So if we shift the technology, now we can apply that dose per plant. Does that mean that we can take the total amount of chemistry that was allowed to be applied on that field and apply that same amount, but only where the weeds are? In theory, yes, but I don't know that the labels are written in such a way that would allow that. And so I think there's a lot of questions around as this technology develops. Do we need to change the way labels are written? Do we need certain allowances for smart spray technology that maybe wouldn't be allowed in a traditional broadcast application situation? So I think, at least as I think about it, North America has probably a lot more to do with how are we going to utilize these applications, and do we need to make changes to our current systems and regulations to better fit the technology? As I mentioned, if you go to different places around the world, those conversations are focused on very different things, but that would be what I'd highlight, I think, for now, in terms of thinking about it in North America. I don't know, Rodrigo, other pieces to that you would add?
Yeah, no, good points, Chris. And the other thing that we haven't discussed here to add to that complexity is that the fact that most of this technology, the way it's being positioned here in North America, not only is going to have this ability to do the green on green, but they also will have this opportunity for a two-tank, two-boom system, right? In the sense that you would have one boom delivering what we call the smart application, right? A targeted application. But then the growers would also have access to a second tank boom system that could deploy a broadcast application, right? So let's think about a post-emergence application right now. We would have a foliar product that controls established weeds, but one of the biggest recommendations for corn and soybean growers for pigweed management is to use what we call a layered residual approach, right? So delivering a residual herbicide in season. If you're only spot spraying, you cannot deliver a broadcast residual application. But now that we have this two-tank, two-boom system, growers will have the ability to do that. Okay, so as of now, when we make, when designing our trials, when we're talking with growers that are adopting this technologies, we got to go by, the regulations and the labels related to a broadcast application. But as we move forward, we have unique opportunities, right, to perhaps adjust rates for the spot only applications. And then the other questions that we get is, what about adjuvants and so on? So I think there are tremendous opportunities out there as far as this technologies continue to evolve. So long story short here, right, Chris, I think this is also new. There are so many questions to be answered still through research, but also through the regulatory process.
And Rodrigo, what types of data do smart sprayer collect and analyze? Do you know how to explain how all those data are generated for the farmer or who is using it?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think I'm gonna speak a little bit to the equipment, right, that we've been exposed to. I know it's gonna vary tremendously from equipment to equipment, but I think as far as these smart sprayers go, I think that the main uh, data that the growers or the applicators expect and they will get out of the applications is what we call the as applied maps, the weed infestation maps, right? And then through those maps, then you can have a better understanding of that area that was treated and the potential savings from that application, right, Chris? So this is what we've seen so far when those cameras are traveling through those fields. They're gathering image, right, on where those weeds are, and that's generating an as applied, I'm sorry, a weed infestation map, okay? And then as the applications go on and off, right, as our nozzles are being triggered on and off, then you have what they call an as applied map. And through this as applied map, again, you can understand the savings. So it's another layer of data that the growers or the applicators will have access to. So I think for now, I think the main way this would be used is to understand where the weeds are and what kind of savings we're seeing from the application. But this is where like academics get really excited. Chris and I have had a lot of conversations because there are tremendous potential around this maps, right? You can understand where the infestations are, you can change your cropping systems, you can change your chemical programs based on where those infested parts of your fields are. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but again, a lot of data that are coming in towards the farmers, and it can get pretty overwhelming pretty fast as well. So here's again another opportunity in extension. And a lot of young agronomists are probably listening to this. I think there's a lot of opportunities here, right? All this big data. We're all talking a lot about big data, all this big data coming in. How can we take all this data and help our growers with their best management decisions? Chris, what do you have to add there?
I don't know that I'd add a lot. I think you're highlighting this the potential value. So we're on the weed science side. I don't know that we've had this level of detailed mapping around weed populations before, and so I think there's a lot of interesting questions being asked right now. I think what'll be interesting is how do we begin to utilize that data and begin to answer some of those questions. I think that's the next step. We've seen data on the yield side now for a while, on the nutrient management side, a lot of soil-based maps. So now to add another layer of data across the field around weed populations and distribution, chemical application, as applied maps. I think it'll be really interesting to see as that database grows and that information available is only becomes more detailed. Then how do we use it? I think that's really the big question. Is we're finding now we can generate this information. The next step is what do you do with it? How do you utilize it effectively? Are there things we can learn that we just didn't understand before because now we have access to these data? And so I'm excited to see what are some of the kind of the novel advancements that come through exploring that.
And along those lines, the big thing right now, right, Chris, that we get is how do we fit this technologies into the current ways that we control weeds, right? And this is kind of what our research is doing, right? How do I replace a broadcast application with a smart spray application? And at some point moving forward, I think we got to start thinking a little bit outside the box, right? We don't have to do things the way they were always done, right? We can start exploring different ways of putting this technology to use so we become more efficient within our agricultural system. So again, it's fascinating that we can detect weeds and spray only where they are, but also this data piece here that we're discussing to bring this all together. It only helps us as an agricultural community to become even more efficient and sustainable.
Rodrigo, you both mentioned about the smart sprayer into corn and soybean crops. Are the smart sprayers compatible with different types of crops besides corn and soybean?
Yeah, that's an excellent question there, Victor. From our understanding, with talking with the manufacturers that I described earlier, I think this corn, soybeans, then cotton. I think those are the main crops for now. Okay, this is where the focus is, and that's again given the amount of acres that are planted to those crops. So I think the main technologies that are coming online now, they're focusing primarily on the commodity crops that I just described, okay? But again, here we're talking green on green applications, okay, the more recent ones. But one thing that I want to add is if you think about specialty crops out there, there are some other technologies that have been around for a while that allow you to do what we call, the green on brown, okay? Anything that they detect that's green, they spray. And in orchards, for instance, those technologies are being deployed, okay? So the technologies we're discussing here today, they're primarily focused on the commodity row crops, but there are some other technologies out there that are already available or are being deployed for a specialty cropping systems scenario. And I think as the technologies continue to evolve, right, Chris, the machines, the computing power, and the need, I mean, I think we're going to start seeing these crops, this technology is being deployed to other crops as well. I'll let you chime in, Chris.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I add a lot just because I don't know that there's a lot known yet. But I think that it's more around the technology development. So as the technology develops and becomes more efficient, then moving it from one crop to another, I think is much easier than what it is to initially develop the technology itself. And so I think there's some discussion around wheat. I mean, so there's just more crops all the time, I think, that are going to probably be brought into the conversation. But yeah, it's right. As Rodrigo said, the development has really been within kind of our agronomic cropping systems on the front end.
Thank you, Dr. Chris Proctor and Dr. Rodrigo Wehrle, for this wonderful conversation about application technology. And stay tuned, because next week we will continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the Farm Beats podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the reviews section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support for this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of Farm Bites.